Hello, everyone. Can you hear me out there? There we are. Right, welcome, everybody, to Walking into Shadow. My name is Simon. I will be your host. This is an introductory series for Mage the Ascension 20th Anniversary Edition. This is a part of the series of World of Darkness role-playing games published by Onyx Path Publishing. And what I'm here to do with all of you is essentially just go through an introduction of the game, help you become comfortable with it, and get a good understanding of what this is about. I entered the world of darkness at the age of 13, about the same time as I entered the world of punk rock. They both have a lot in common. Both were reactions to an orthodoxy that needed challenging. Both asked you to question your perceptions and what you accepted as the norm. Both games and music showed a deep distrust of authority and authoritarianism, and both developed a deep and vibrant subculture. Now, coming from a background at the time of mostly Dungeons and Dragons, so fantasy adventure, seeing metal lyrics and the poetry of Lord Byron quoted at the start of chapters in the books was exceedingly different from anything I'd played or seen before. Now, following the success of Vampire the Masquerade and Werewolf the Apocalypse, games that promoted the classic monster as the protagonist and explored the inner darkness of its characters, White Wolf Game Studios released their third game in the World of Darkness series, which was Mage the Ascension. Similarly to its predecessors, it proposed a dark gothic punk world where the supernatural lay hidden past mortal sight and monsters ruled the night. Now, where it differed was the monsters of Mage were entirely too human. Physiologically, they were human. Their conflicts were human. And their beliefs, the most important and a core element of the game, were incredibly human. Because through these beliefs, they were able to perform magic. Mage is a game of magic in the modern day. But it also blends fantasy, science fiction, and horror into this wondrous setting where anything can happen. Now, the same things that make Mage innovative and unique can also be a little intimidating. When it released, at that time, it was one of the only games to have a free-form magic system. Previously, any spellcasters would select from a list of spells or a number of options and were bound to those powers they had. But inspired by its ancestor in Ars Magica, a little shout out to Ars Magica, the nature of reality played a major role in the cosmological nature of the game. Above all, Mage the Ascension is a highly philosophical game that is very accessible and can allow all sorts of things to happen. So as I mentioned, this series is intended to be completely newcomer friendly. I'll only be drawing on content from the Mage the Ascension 20th Anniversary line. It, in my opinion, is the best presented and most accessible edition to date. One would hope that as you release editions, you improve each time. Over the course of the series, we're going to examine the setting, the rules, and all the facets of the game to help you, our viewers, become comfortable playing in it. We'll also speak with people involved in writing the game and presenting the game. Just have some interviews about some of the books that have been released or are to be released in future. You may see in the chat window there's a link to the current Kickstarter for Lore of the Traditions. You can follow that to check that out. We're going to start with a little exercise. And this exercise was presented to me by my friend Ben McFarland, who's a rather prolific RPG author and Ars Magica writer. Because they have similar connections, these all work together. Now, I would like you to picture yourself walking down a city street, any city street, or even a country road. And as you walk, you see in front of you a small child crying and two parents consoling this child. And standing next to them is a very tall wooden telephone pole. And on top of that pole, you can see a teacup. When you approach, because you are an altruistic or at least inquisitive mage, someone capable of casting and using magic, you ask them what the problem is. And they tell you that precious antique teacup, which represents all of their material wealth, has been placed on top of this pole by some nefarious rogue, and they would very much like to get it down, but they are unable to do so. Now, being the altruistic mage that you are, and using your knowledge of magic in any capacity, this could be from other RPGs, TV, games, fiction, whatever. In the chat window, if you would be so kind, present to me a spell which will get that teacup off that telephone pole and down to you and the family. Use your imagination. Be creative. You can think of anything here. I'll get you started. You cast a spell that stops the Earth's gravitational rotation and the cup tips off because it, however, continues to move, or in reverse. You stop gravity from affecting it and it falls off. Okay? So, anyone in the chat, toss out some ideas. Anything at all. Okay. Speak to the crow and ask it to bring it to me and offer a reward. Awesome. All right. I'm going to make a note of these. We are going to be returning to them at a later date. That was a really cool one. Okay, any other ones? I mean, that's fine. We can stick with that, but I'm sure we've got some ideas out there. Okay, using portals to bring it towards simple telekinesis. Okay, so we've got speaking to animals, dimensional magic, and telekinesis. Any other ones? If not, we can move on. Okay, great. So let's keep those three spells in mind as we move forward. And now we're going to do another exercise. And it's a mindfulness exercise. I'm not much of a mindfulness practitioner. But, oh, hold on, we've got another one. Make the ground shake for the teacup to fall. Cool. All right, yeah, keep tossing these ideas in there. And we'll come back to each one of them when the time comes. But for this next exercise, I want you to indulge me with this. It's a very common one. Probably all done it before, but just close your eyes and take a breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. Pay attention to the breath. Pay attention to how it moves in through your nose or mouth, if that's where you chose to breathe, how it moves through your lungs, how your body reacts, how it feels. Use your senses to picture it. Do you see it as energy moving into you? Do you see it as the artistic depiction of air moving through you? point of the exercise, of course, is always to focus on the breathing, right? This is something we do automatically. It's something that we don't necessarily always pay attention to. But what if you were? What if you had this awareness where all these things that you do automatically and take for granted, you could focus on and do. So you were aware of all the breath at all times. So most of us are not always able to tell that, right? In Mage, that means we're sleeping. Called by mages as sleepers. That is the majority of people in the world. They go through day to day. There's nothing wrong with that. They simply just don't have that ascended awareness and consciousness. But some of us, in Mage, when we take that breath, we exhale and we wake up. We no longer walk through life as if it's a dream. We now have achieved a level of awareness and comprehension that is holistic. We're awakened to the nature of reality, the nature of magic. The awakened, known as mages, see, feel, grasp, and ultimately become magic. It's not just an external force, it's a tool we hold within. This moment for a mage is known as the epiphany. And the epiphany can come from a near-death experience. It could come from a rigorous occult study culminating in a magical ritual of epic proportions. It could also come from a scientific breakthrough, the discovery of a new phenomena or a life form. One thing that we'll be coming to pretty regularly is that magic is described differently by everyone who practices it. For some, it's bestowed by a deity. For others, they speak the language of creation. Or, to draw on one of the easiest media references for Mage ever, in the Matrix, a technological sense where they understand that the universe is made up of data. And they view magic as being able to manipulate that data. And then for others, it's comes across more as just the inspiration within that allows us to achieve great invention and innovation. It drives us forward technologically and allows us to conquer and control our natural world. Though many are asleep, we are all capable of this. Now, when you awakened, when you saw through the shell of the mortal world, you were guided through it by your avatar. Your avatar can appear to you as anything. What is it? It depends on who you ask. Again, it could be a fragment of divinity waiting to reunite with the whole. It could be a past life. It could be a representation of your inner self. It can appear to you as anything, molded by what you expect or want to see. It could be an angel. It could be a demon. It could be a teacher or mentor that held great significance. It could even be yourself. To draw on some popular media for the Marvel superhero Mark Spector, Moon Knight, the Egyptian god Khonshu could be his avatar. In the movie Donnie Darko, Frank the Bunny could be his avatar. Though I haven't finished the series, one of the theories at the beginning of Wilfred is that Wilfred the dog could be Elijah Wood's guide, could be an avatar. Could even maybe be Wilson, either the ball with a bloody handprint from Castaway or the wise neighbor from Home Improvement. One can only say for certainty what the avatar is to them. It appears during the moment of epiphany, and it holds the key to your understanding of magic. So let's recap briefly. Your awakening is when you become aware of magic. This is brought upon by the moment of epiphany, guided by your avatar. Now, Awesome, yes. The expansion contraction. Sorry, I wasn't looking at the chat just then. But that's it. It's about awareness. Now, avatars have a personality, and it both affects the mage, and the mage affects it. The personality is known as the essence, and it reflects the core nature of that avatar. There are 4 commonly accepted ones, and each of them sort of dictates and guides how a mage behaves, because it's all interconnected here. So you have dynamic, and a dynamic avatar essence is a driven and restless mage. They have wild creative potential. A static one has a tendency to be more steadfast, more rigid, make things firm. The questing essence, the questing avatar, is the urge to seek out new horizons and just drive one forward. And then there's primordial, which is more of a mysterious, a noble nature, a deep, unspoken connection. Now, the stronger the avatar, the stronger its manifestation, and the stronger it affects the mage, and the stronger your connection to, in one part, your connection to magic. If we were to take one of my previous examples, let's take Wilson. Wilson the Ball is conceivably a weak avatar. It's more of a voice in Tom Hanks' head. Wilson the Neighbor, much stronger avatar, because Tim Allen speaks to him and he gets advice, and you can see him over that fence, for the most part. Over time, the avatar guides you and pushes you to your greatest potential. And it does this through challenges known as seekings. Seekings are essentially a spirit quest of sorts. They take place in a symbolic realm in your head. While some mages have disappeared from physical reality, that's not usually the case, and no one knows where they go at that time. And as you go through this seeking, when you've completed it, it increases your understanding of magic. And your understanding of magic is referred to as arete. And what arete is an understanding combined with your will that allows you to enact magical effect. It allows you to impose your will upon the world. So when you're casting that spell to get that teacup off the telephone pole, the extent to which you are able to do this, based on how powerful or complicated your spell is going to be affected in part by your arete. Okay, here's a good question. What is magic? Hold on. There we are. I had to shrink the graphic. I was not quite as hidden in the test. Magic is technology. Take from the Greek techne. It's the act of making, creating. Magic isn't just boom pow spells. It's not fireballs, invisibility, and flying. It can also refer to our common understanding these days of technology. So not just technology, but technology. Our computers, my phone, your phone too, etc. So, I talked earlier about belief and how critical belief is to mage and to magic. And on the heels of magic being technology, let's talk about beliefs. And beliefs in Mage the Ascension 20th Anniversary Edition are called focus. Focus is made up of three things. Paradigm, practices, and instruments. Paradigm is what you believe, practices is what you do, and instruments is what you use. And through those you create magic. So, let us return to our telephone pole. And our mage at this point is a bit of a blank slate. Now we have a few sample spells that we've attempted to get this telephone pole off. But I'm going to use an example myself to illustrate focus. Let's say that our mage follows something similar to the Western occult Hermetic traditions, right? And if you're familiar with, Dungeons and Dragons magic and casting spells and rituals and so on, this is a lot of symbols and circles and calling upon the true names of things to enact magic. So this Hermetic magician, their paradigm is the world has a system that can be exploited and utilized. Perhaps it has a language, Enochian or something, the language of angels, for example. And this is separate from someone who might believe that they get their magic from God. In that case, it's a direct channel. Here it's God creates everything, but I get to mess around with it based on spells I use. And so, as part of the paradigm, they will create summoning circles. And inside they'll inscribe the names of demons, and they'll summon a demon, and they'll ask the demon for information, create a Faustian bargain, that sort of thing, right? Kind of a prosperity from the Tempest. So in doing that, I've also sort of explained practices there, right? High ritual, drawing of symbols and so on. Instruments, well, can be those. It can be the symbols. It can be the use of language. It could be symbols from the tarot, wands, cups, staves, swords, etc., right? All symbolic things to represent other things, but utilized in their ritual. So, this Hermetic mage comes across this teacup, and they want to get it down from there, so let's look at some of these, and we'll see if we can apply it here. So, speaking to the crow, you can cast a spell which maybe allows you just the gift of the language of animals, right? And you speak the name of an angel in charge of animals, or in charge of corvids, for example, to be very specific. For a dimensional portal, a similar sort of idea of sympathetic magic, of the ground and the top of the pole are the same thing, and my ritual will help explain that and impose that reality. And so all of a sudden, what was once up there is now down here. So as I said, what you believe influences what you do. The Hermetic believes that's the nature of reality. So what they believe influences what they do, the practices, the ritual, which influences what they use, the tools, the language, the symbols, etc. And they create magic. One of the things that your avatar allows you to do, and Awakening has permitted you, is an understanding of, and this is almost regardless of your focus and your paradigm, an understanding of the magical building blocks of reality. And the magical building block is called quintessence. And quintessence is that. It creates everything and it forms them into patterns. And those patterns are everything. The teacup is a pattern. The pole is a pattern. I'm a pattern. You're a pattern. The family's a pattern. The crow's a pattern. Magic allows you to manipulate quintessence, to manipulate patterns. Okay, so throwing a lot of words. If there's one thing World of Darkness games do is they expand on your vocabulary. But now I talked about belief again. Well, let's talk about belief again. And how you can have a game which allows two mages, two spellcasters or will workers to use the same set of rules, exist in the same universe, the same setting, and be able to enact magic even though their paradigms may conflict. Well, part of it, and this is where Mage gets trippy and awesome. It was already awesome, here it gets a little more awesome, is reality has a very specific feature to it. Reality is consensual. What we agree reality is reality. And this affects mages and how they work with things. And this is going to tie back to technology. If the consensus of reality is that, for example, God created everything, there are angels, there is a devil, all spirits are devils, and so on. If that's the consensus, then that's the world that we all live in. But let's look at our world. By and large, our world does not permit magic. We function off of technology, science. Let's go back to that telephone pole. If the crow flies down, lands on your arm, and you start speaking to it, and it goes up and takes that teacup and brings it down, that's weird. If you, and I'm going to use this, the two second ones here. If you make the ground shake, or if you grow up the child, the ground shake is still weird, maybe possible. The grow up one, where you're physically changing and making this child larger, not so commonly accepted as something that's possible. But let's say that instead of being a hermetic magician, you are a technomancer, someone who uses what we would call technology and science to enact magic. And you say, don't worry, wait, I'll go get this. And you take your special adhesive climbing gloves, which are not always adhesive climbing gloves, and you shimmy up the pole, come back down, grab it. People are going to believe that. Or even a little more outlandish, but still believable because I've seen the videos of the military using them. You happen to have your handy jetpack with you, and you activate it, you fly up, grab it, and come down. People are going to believe the jetpack before they believe you chanting a few words and physically levitating off the ground to get this thing. Right? Because the consensus is that reality operates off of science and scientific concepts and scientific method. Right? And so there are two forms of magic that result from that, vulgar and coincidental. And some of these examples that we've gone through can easily be coincidental. Weird, but coincidental. So the ground shaking, so long as you didn't yell out, "I invoke you, spirits of the earth, tremble and rattle this pole until it falls down," then yeah, it's kind of coincidental, so you've got to find a way to do that. Theoretically, you could stomp on the ground and make it happen. The crow is weird, but crows are smart, and some people have these abilities, so that could work. Those would fall under coincidental magic, but including the jetpack even. But flying, unassisted, that's a vulgar magic. It violates the consensus, and that's not okay. Reality does not like that. And so what reality does when it doesn't like what you're doing is it acknowledges that magic as a paradox, something that should not be and cannot be. And depending on how vulgar the spell was, depending on a number of different factors, which we will examine as we go through the series, it smacks the mage. Not necessarily physically, but all sorts of things can happen. If, for example, you cast an outrageously vulgar spell, and because it's a game and you roll dice, rolled absolutely terribly, you build up paradox inside you. And the more you have, the worse things will eventually be when it all finally sort of detonates on you. Right? So, that's why you don't often see mages wandering down the street and casting stuff. Casting spells, throwing fireballs. But why you might accept a highly elite team of soldiers with things that look kind of like ray guns, right? It's the most, I would say, one of the most innovative and most interesting things about Mage the Ascension is the idea of consensual reality. And, you know, a number of us out there, I imagine a number of us in the chat, have seen this throughout our lives. And the advances in technology have been immense over the last number of years. And so more and more is acceptable. The sort of, I don't know if it's a joke about cyberpunk not being fiction anymore, right? What was once science fiction is now science fact and reality, right? And this is because the consensus is science, and the people who, the mages who control that, have influenced us to accept it. Now, if you are a mage, there's one, besides paradox, there's one kind of internal thing that you're going to have to grapple with a fair bit. And that's the simple fact that you are a mage and you can alter reality. And you and your predecessors have been doing that throughout history, causing all sorts of problems or making things great for other people. But what you have to balance as you learn is this hubris that comes about of, I can do this, so I will. Because it can always come back to smack you. Am I going to raise the right hand here? There. Paradox. Can always come back to you. But there is a goal here. A perfect understanding of magic is part of it. And what all mages are striving towards is the subtitle. It's going to show in a second. Ascension. And this can be personal or mass ascension for the world, for everybody. And what ascension is, again, depends on who you ask. If you are a technomancer, it could be a technological singularity where we all become as one. If you are a monotheist or believing in a prime mover It's a reunification with the one above, and every one becomes one. It's an elevation of who we are, and that hubris can come in when mages are trying to achieve this, because they're mages. Their name comes from meaning wise ones. They know what's best, right? They have this awareness. So they are the ones that will shepherd you towards ascension. Of course, since not everyone agrees what ascension is, there are conflicts. And what we will go into in our next episode is what's known as the Ascension War, one of the major conflicts of the setting, and we'll start to examine some of the factions and groups that one can belong to in Mage the Ascension. We do have Travis Legg, the developer for the Lore of the Traditions book, here for an interview tonight. By schedule, we only have about 10 minutes left, but hopefully we can get a few good questions in here. Let me transition. Oh, hold on. Yep. Okay, great. I don't know how well it's showing up on the stream there, but you are there. Okay, excellent. Thank you for joining us. Yeah. Oh. Awesome. So I'm actually getting the chat look coming over you here. So I need to adjust a few things here. Apologies for the technical difficulties, everybody. Right. There we go. Okay. So I think I've got you in the right spot now. Okay. So if you have questions for Travis, please throw them into the chat. If you have questions in general, please throw them into the chat. I will be touching on everything over time. Oh, no. Okay. Let me look. Oh, I think, what do we call audio? Okay. I think it's, oh, do you want to say something?
Sure, something.
Okay. I think I got you right.
Excellent.
In chat, can you hear Travis?
Let's find out. Let's see. Yeah, I think I'm good. Thank you so much, Elusive. I greatly appreciate that. Why don't you go ahead and DM me at Plastic Age Plays, and I'll send you a PDF of one of my Storyteller's Vault things as thank you for pointing out our audio issue. Greatly appreciate it. So you were saying questions.
Yeah, right. So, because this is an introductory series, I thought it might be great to get a sense of your introduction to Mage.
Sure.
Honestly, I mean, this was, after Vampire and Werewolf, this was definitely a sort of a jump in thinking and approaching a game. When did you first come to it? What were your first impressions of it? And what sort of things did you look at it and go, wait, what? And sort of have to wrap your head around something, if you'll pardon the term, arcane.
Well, so the quick, short version of this tale is that when I was about 4 or 5 years old, I was living in a little town called Mauston, Wisconsin. It's famous for having 3,000 people and 5,000 cows. It's a tiny little farm town, not much going on. But my older brother was into Dungeons and Dragons. So I, therefore, was also into Dungeons and Dragons. I played pretty regularly. My mom was my first DM. Played till I was about 11 or so, played strictly D&D. And then in a comic book shop, I came across Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangeness, which I then suddenly fell in love with. And so fast forward a little bit, age 13, 14, We're talking at this point, it's 1992, 1993. After my parents' divorce, I moved to Rockford, Illinois, and I immediately gravitate to the McDonald's out front of our of East High School there, where I meet up with all the other weird kids who wear the same band shirts that I wear and have the same funny hair colors that I have. And one day, uh, if memory serves correctly, we had played Vampire before, but I distinctly remember coming in to McDonald's one morning, and my friend Dan McDorman was sitting there, and he's reading this purple book. And I say, "Well, what you got there?" And he says, "Oh, this is Mage the Ascension. Uh, it's a book about modern wizards. Like you're a wizard, but it's now." And I'm like, "Oh, that sounds like a trip. I would love to check that out." And he said, "You can borrow this when I'm done with it, but I just want to warn you that this book not only reads in circles, but it reads in misleading circles." And I was like, "Sold, I'm in, let's do it." And so I borrowed the book from him, I want to say about a week later. And just, it was mind blown because it was really quite different from anything else that I had ever encountered. And we dove in, we started playing. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we actually wound up starting a werewolf campaign first. And then sort of through the Umbra connection, that was really what helped me sort of get it for Mage, particularly because first edition Mage played much closer to elements that were in Werewolf. If you look at the first, I think it's the first adventure that was released for Mage the Ascension, was Loom of Fate. And it feels like a werewolf adventure that has wizards in it. It's very much about the Wild, the Worm, and the Weaver. It plays a big role in it. And so that's kind of the lens from which I approached Mage. And we were a bunch of sort of, crusty, moody goth kids. So we all naturally gravitated towards the Cult of Ecstasy and the Hollow Ones.
Mm-hmm.
But, the group I was playing with in high school always wound up sort of gravitating back to Vampire. And so it wasn't probably until I was, I must have been in my mid 20s. I started up a group, a regular group. I was like, I really want to play Mage. I want to have this concept for a campaign that is going to have a player from each tradition in it. And we'll just get together at Denny's on Sunday nights after Xena and Hercules. And we'll play each week, and we'll tell this big epic story. And it wound up running, I think, about 3.5 years with the same group. They played up to mastery. I ran this big epic tale. We weaved in kind of some of the stuff that was happening in the novels and whatnot in it. And that was really where I really started to fall in love with Mage. In the sense that I do now, in the sense that it's probably my favorite World of Darkness game. It's definitely my favorite World of Darkness game. It's probably like in my top 3 role-playing games. Yeah, because, and the thing that really cemented that love for me was that we would have 9 players who had 12 different opinions on each situation. Mm-hmm. Not only in terms of like the narrative, what are we going to do with this X problem? But they would get into these deep esoteric conversations about what their characters' beliefs were, trying to find this common ground by which they would be able to work team effects to be able to that combine. Because while they were all starting mages, even when they were getting into like adept levels of personal mastery, they learned, they sussed out pretty quick that if they could set aside their dogmatic differences, they could do amazing feats of magic. But a lot of the fun came in, everybody at that table was dedicated to their character's paradigm. They were very much about like, this is the experience for me. It's not about, can I do this with these spheres, though we did have those conversations too. It was much more about, how does my character do this with their spheres? And that led to some really cool. That led to some dynamic role playing, the likes of which I have yet to again encounter in tabletop, because it's really not just about like it's people who fundamentally see the world differently
Mm-hmm.
from one another, trying to find a common ground, and being motivated to do so. Um, Common complaint that you see in the world today. I'm sure it's a common complaint in the world of any day. If you ask the people that live in that day, is an inability of people to set aside differences and work together. And like um, seeing that happen, you know, in a fictional context, sure, but seeing people who have fundamentally opposing beliefs be able to set aside enough of that to find a common ground, it was inspiring. And that's one of the things I love about Mage. It's a very inspiring game.
Well, and they also have, it's not just that they have fundamentally different beliefs, but their fundamentally different beliefs can actually affect
Right. That
reality
they can
itself.
change the world. Yeah, exactly.
It's not just,
So how do you argue with someone that they're wrong when they too can change the world?
right, right.
Yeah, so it's a very it's just that element of it to me is the most fun, and that's part of why when I stepped in and joined the team of developers that were working on Technocracy Reloaded, that's part of why I really fought to include the idea of unlikely allies into the Mage books, and that idea carries through into Lore of the Traditions. Looking at how these traditions, how these, you know, in the case of Technocracy, the conventions, but how these organizations of mages with their specific dogma and their specific beliefs, how do they set that aside?
Mm-hmm.
Because to my mind, the lore of the Ascension War, which you didn't really get into in the introductions, it's a little bit deeper. Those of you who are new to Mage, you'll get there. But the idea that these factions are fighting over reality, to me, in the modern world, I would think that all of these factions, particularly the technocracy, who are pro technology and pro sort of the modern status quo, would look around and go, we have given all these tools to sleepers, and look at what they did to the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Look at what they did to each other. This grand experiment is failing
Right.
in every conceivable way. And so I personally like the idea of mages having to set aside, you know, in the case of across different factions,
Mm-hmm.
500 years of bickering, of bloody fighting,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to say our real enemy is human ignorance.
Right.
And if we don't figure out a way to solve that problem, we are going to be the mages running the cinder.
Yeah.
You know,
Forget mass ascension, you know.
right? Yeah, we're dealing with mass extinction now. So how do we pump the brakes on that? And then we can get back to arguing over whether it's better to have indoor plumbing or dragons. You know, so. Yeah,
I like that you brought that up because one of the things I found very interesting about the 20th anniversary edition, and for those of you in chat who are familiar with previous editions, the perspective of the protagonists has changed over each edition, or rather, who are the good guys has been different. Initially, it's the classical mages, and the technology-based people are this shadowy organization controlling everything, you know, the Illuminati, Men in Black, New World Order. But as you go edition by edition, they start to be a little more humanized, and we start to see them as people too. We sort of see divisions in them as well. But what I thought was really interesting with M20 is that it was consciously presented as, let's let you take any side ground up. It's not, yep, you belong to the dragon faction, or you belong to the computer faction, and the computer faction are the bad guys, or the reverse. It's you belong to the dragons and the computers and the worshipping trees factions and so on, and you're all on a level playing field. Each style of play is equally valid. each Chronicle concept is equally valid. There are just as many bad people in each group as there are good people in each group. So like you said, that setting aside differences thing is supported much more strongly.
Yeah, I believe so. And again, without getting too far into the like minutia of the politics of it, um, ultimately what you have when you look at any body of mages, any group of mages, is you have people who all, each of the traditions, when you talk about the vanilla sort of original, the thing that we're kickstarting for right now, the lore of the traditions refers to the Council of Nine Mystic Traditions. And even within that body, you have nine different umbrellas of practice. They're basically bound by having similar belief structures. Okay. But that doesn't necessarily mean similar beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
If you look within the Akashiana, the thing that binds them is their belief in reincarnation, and in that reincarnation being a method toward ascension. That is the road that you walk toward ascension. That is how you attain your enlightenment. And yes, there are trappings of martial arts tied in with the Akashiana, absolutely. But that is, and I think that especially in Laura traditions, the work is done very well to display that that is a function of how you get there. That is not the end goal. You know, and I think Hiromi did an amazing job at sort of driving that point home in the Akashiana chapter in Laura of the Traditions. Just to pull another example, the current preview that's up there right now is the Verbena. Verbena covers sort of everything that is old ways witchcraft. Well, when you cast that umbrella is pretty big. There's a lot of things that you might be able to fit under that practice. So as you get within, then you have more refined each individual. There are groups within those groups, factions, if you will, that happen within the traditions, where people of like minds sort of band together. But even within those, at the end of the day, a mage is when you scrape away all of the other trappings of it, when you scrape away all of the other bells and whistles, a mage is someone who is so confident in their beliefs and so stubborn that they can inflict their will upon reality around them. These are not people that play well with others. They're not good at compromise necessarily. So the conflicts that you're having in there, to my mind, are going to be very interesting. They will play, to my mind, at the same level of drama, whether you're playing like everybody's in a tradition or you're playing nobody's in a tradition. Everybody's part of one of the crafts or the Disparate Alliance, if you're using the 20th anniversary edition option that the Disparate Alliance has formed. If everybody's from a different background, as long as you're on that particular axis of the Ascension War, to me, that drama can function. You might have bad blood between one another, but you can still make that work at the table, I think. With barring getting into Marauders and the Fandy, which are a whole nother thing that is probably a bit deeper than we want to dive into on this particular discussion.
Get to them in time. No.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry.
I was going to say, I saw in a question, somebody asked in the chat, does it look like we're winning? Does it look like who's winning? Go ahead and let me know and I'll answer, but continue.
What would you suggest to someone who is watching this or has been pitched on Mage, gotten the elevator pitch and bit? What would you tell them to watch out for, in the sense of, don't worry, this might look like it'll trip you up, but give it time, right? So don't be intimidated by this aspect of the game, or don't be intimidated by this aspect of the game, because one of the things I do find when talking in chat and Discord or forums or whatever is I do hear people say, Mage seems cool, but I'm not sure I get it.
Sure.
And I think it's valid, but I don't think I think it's valid to the extent that That's totally fair to say, but I don't think it's as inaccessible as it seems. But there are points where you do have to sort of take a moment with them.
So I would agree. So here's two things. I'm going to say two things, and one of them is really going to sound like I'm just shilling for the current Kickstarter, but I'm not. I promise. I'm just very proud of the work that the writers have done. The first thing I would honestly recommend, if you're new to Mage right now, if you've never played Mage before, if you're not aware of what Mage is, I really would recommend going and throwing $5 at the Mage at the current Mage Kickstarter for Lore of the Traditions and looking at those tradition write-ups in there and seeing, because right now everything except for the Verbena and the Virtual Adepts are up for backers to read. Mm-hmm. And the Verbena, I think, is dropping tomorrow. So you can read, that's the first 8 traditions. You can read through each of those groups, and if you can't find something in those 8 groups that grabs you and is like, oh, this is super awesome and I want to be able to do this, you might not dig Mage, or you might want to look over at the Technocracy. But that's just honest. That's me shooting from the hip. I'm really proud of what everybody's written on this book, and I really think it's the best primer for who these groups are. Having said that, though, when you get to the where the rubber meets the road of the system, I found, after running Mage now for 20 years plus, I found that I run Mage much more now like I did when I started than I did for about 15 years in the middle. And the reason I say that is because when I first started running Mage, because yes, the magic system can be complicated, right? And yes, you can look at it and you can really sort of spin yourself up trying to figure out how all this all works. But if you boil it down to its basic, you have 9 elements of reality that are described by the spheres. And each sphere goes 1 to 5. Mm-hmm. And it's just, how good are you with this? How much of this can you control on a scale of 1 to 5? Right. And if you break it down to that level of simplicity in your head, you can pretty much run Mage. It's really that simple. If you want to get down to nuts and bolts and minutia of it, sure, there's books like How Do You Do That, where it really breaks down, like, at this level of spheres, I'll let you in on a little secret. I love Sotiros Braccato, both as a human being and as a designer, and I love his work. I disagree with him on some of his calls about what spheres require what in some of the books. And I would imagine anybody who plays or storytells Mage might feel the same way. It is free form, and that is by design. That's not a bug, that's a feature. So, one of the things I would recommend if you're new to picking up this game is sit down with your group and say, hey, this is a free form magic system. Let's play with it. Let's decide at our table what fits under these definitions of lesser forces, major forces, and have those conversations, because that's where the conversation sprung from I was talking about earlier, where you're getting into like paradigms and you're getting into, well, my beliefs are da-da-da-da for my character. And that's where you're going to really find the fun, I think. So I would say don't let it scare you. Simplify it as much as you feel you need to make the numbers on the page work. I don't think it's hyperbole when we talk about the Technocracy Reloaded Kickstarter, for example, is like a 50-page book, and it really does have everything in it you need to run Mage. It breaks down what the spheres do. It doesn't give you the minutia that you'll find in the 700-page core book for Mage 20.
Don't be intimidated by the 700-page core book.
Right? Yeah,
they're nice.
They're nice to have around. They make a good home defense weapon, right. But they're not great for like introduction to a book. But if you grab one of the jump starts and you use the guidelines that are in there, it's really going to tell you what you need to know about running Mage. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
And I did just want to take 1 second to answer. I believe so. Is chat asking me like who I think is winning the Ascension War? Because it's the Nefandi, hands down. Look around you, as Golgari Glen Ross said in the channel, gestures and everything. Yeah, exactly. The Nefandi are winning.
Yeah,
and humanity's not. Yeah, humanity's not helping. But continue. Sorry.
Sure, no. for those of you who are listening and watching who don't know, the Nefandi are, if anyone's the bad guy in Mage, it's the Nefandi, and they want the utter oblivion of everything. But we'll get into more detail on them when their time comes. One thing, based on what you were saying there about working with your own group,
Sure.
and it's one of the things I've sort of, because I'm going to mention Ars Magica only because they are related, and
Sure.
I came to Ars Magica after Mage, and started properly playing it with this fantastic group over the last few years. And one of the most interesting things that came out of that was your Ars Magica may vary. Your table will vary, right? Your interpretation
Right.
of how this works will vary, and because of the freeform magic system and the consensus of Ars Magica being what it is, will be interpreted by everybody differently. And so, in my mind, and I imagine you'll agree based on what you said, if you are just coming to the game, dear listeners and viewers, don't let anyone else necessarily tell you what is, but just let them guide you in answering your questions. Take what they say, but do what works for you.
Right.
Because your table may interpret it differently, and there doesn't have to be a 100% consensus across every Mage player on how every single bit of minutia works on there. And one
Exactly.
one thing that had occurred to me about it, and it did come from playing ours, was if you're used to coming from something like an F20 game like D&D, Pathfinder, anything that has a set list of spells that you're going to work with, and they have this effect, and they do this effect, and this thing happens when you cast them and nothing else, and there's no flexibility in it whatsoever, and none of that's a bad thing. It is doing what it does for what it is, doing what it is for what it does. That works somehow. And looking at the possibility of freeform magic in here, and in this case I'm speaking specifically to those who would be storytellers in here, is there's that adage for GMs of whatever you expect the players to do, they'll do the opposite and then run roughshod over that.
Sure.
That is going to happen exponentially with Mage, and don't let it scare you. Promote it and be a fan of it. Like, you're not here to play. Give them opposition, give them conflict, give them challenges, but you're not here to play Call of Cthulhu with Mage characters and just crush their spirits utterly and grind them beneath your boot. You're here to give them that chance to shine. They're not superheroes, but you don't restrict superheroes in an RPG. You have to in comic books, but give them that opportunity and look at it and go, but you can do this cool thing and you can do this cool thing, and roll with it, run with it, because while it looks scary, remember, you can't plan for what they're going to do when they don't have access to this.
Right.
So don't worry about it when they do.
And the other thing I would say is it's funny you mentioned, you come up with a consensus at your table, which is a very meta exercise for when you're playing Mage.
Sure.
And that's kind of where we talk about the circles before, the Mage reads in circles. Mage plays kind of in circles in a sense, in that you can sit with a group of people and look at these loose guidelines that are laid out in the quick reference sheets to the spheres, and come up with your table's consensus of what an effect requires in order to do it. Because what you're doing at the end of the day when you make a spell in Mage, very similar to Ars Magica, is you are taking the traits that you have on your sheet and describing the effect you wish to occur. Mm-hmm. In the exercise that you did during the introduction, any one of those descriptions of effects that the audience dropped in the chat, you could describe through multiple spheres. Mm-hmm. You could use forces to bring the cup to you telekinetically, but you could just as easily use, spirit to convince the spirit of that crow that you asked to bring you that cup. And when you start layering in and peppering in things like paradigm, you could say, well, my dream speaker, who is very spirit oriented in their magic, is going to uh, speak to the spirit of the cup and command it to jump into my hand or ask it to come to my hand. But I'm going to use forces magic to do that because those are the spheres I have to describe the effect. You see, so there's several different ways to approach that very simple problem, and none of the ones that we've just discussed really require more than like 2 dots in something.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's all pretty basic stuff.
And that was one of the things that when we get really into the spheres and how magic works, we're going to go back to those ones and basically plot them out using that, because
Nice.
that's one of the reasons I wanted to ask, so we had them in print and I didn't have to remember them. So yeah, so I know we've gone a little over time. There were tech issues, but I was hoping for the full hour. Does anybody have any sort of final questions? I was going to look back in the chat. I wasn't seeing everything before, so
Sure.
because of the way the way everything is working here. Okay, question. Where can I research incorporating themes like aliens or time travel into Mage or some other branch of the game? Changeling, maybe. There is the time sphere, for one.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you have access to that. You don't necessarily have to cross over.
Yeah, I mean, Mage supports just about any subgenre you can imagine because there are people who have beliefs that fit into those subgenres. There are aliens. According to the technocracy, there aren't spirits. There are extra dimensional entities. And some of those extra dimensional entities might be a awakened teacup, but it also might be a slender gray alien who abducts people and puts probes in their places. You know what I mean? Like those are equally likely to be an enemy in a technocracy campaign.
Yeah.
So having said that, though, they had mentioned Changeling in the chat. I would say Changeling is a great place to pull antagonists from. Werewolf is a great place to pull antagonists from. Yeah, I mean anything in Mage. I mean, if you want to bring vampires in, there's a whole clan of vampires that used to be a house of the Order of Hermes, which is one of the traditions, and they do not get along. Turns out the Order of Hermes doesn't like it when you turn a whole house into vampires. They get real cranky about it. Fight a couple of wars over it. In fact, yeah. So you can pull antagonists from wherever. Wraith makes a great place for antagonists. There are several groups, both in the traditions and the technocracy, that deal with the dead, or that could reasonably be dealing with the dead. So yeah, I mean, it is a massive sprawling world, and you can research into all manner of sources anywhere from the world of darkness you can pull from. But if you want to dial it in tightly, I would really say looking at M20, the core book, there's a lot of stuff just built right into that core book. And then Gods and Monsters does a great job of sort of fleshing out the various types of antagonists that one might want to put in a Mage game.
Well, it was one of the reasons I was saying there, don't be intimidated by the 700-page book.
Right.
It's a 700-page book, but say you add up the pages in the Player's Handbook, DMG, and Monster Manual, well, you're hitting 900 or something there, right?
It's a lot.
It's a lot, but everything's there that you need in that sense. So don't let it, throw you when it comes to it. In the chat, so just another guy named Harry. If I don't know if you're familiar with Grant Morrison's The Invisibles, but it's a very Mage comic series, and time travel and aliens fit into that as well. So if you're looking for a fictional bit of inspiration to use for your Mage game, that's not a bad place to start, so long as you're okay with it also being a bit of a horror series and incredibly anarchic, and kind of all over the place. But yeah, in terms of mage mechanics, like Travis said, you've got a lot of the World of Darkness to operate from. So are there any final questions that we've got? We'll be back in 2 weeks, I believe it is, to do the factions in the Ascension War and a bit more of the world that they live in. But we do have another question. Okay. Do you think a beginner storyteller can run an adventure based on the lore of Mage itself without much trouble, or would you suggest a more soft approach of mages dealing with mundane stuff like a blessing and a curse to get the mechanics?
Oh, I'm always my recommendation is always to start small, even if you have experienced players.
Sure.
Yeah, start with tiny stories and figure out who these people are and what these people really believe, because that will inform what you're doing system wise. As when you're dealing with a group of street level mages who are trying to pay their bills, people who come across a person who's a sleeper who is in an unfortunate situation that they want to help with, and how do I use magic to do that? And how do I use magic coincidentally to do that? How do I respect the rule of shade, the idea that we don't reveal ourselves to people willy-nilly, but still influence this person's life for the better, or stop someone from influencing it for the worse, and build from there. That would be my recommendation. And yeah, there's some resources on the Storyteller's Vault that I think are very good for that purpose. And yes, not to toot my own horn, but I think A Blessing and a Curse is a great starting story. But I also think I'm going to be running it on Friday here on the channel. Weighing the Cost is also a great starting story, and it's a much more, though the majority of the characters you deal within it are equally mundane, it's a much more bombastic mage tale, as it features a marauder antagonist. So that gets into reality warping and melting that mages, beyond what mages can normally do, and things along those lines. So nice. Yeah, keep it simple, but keep it but make the simple interesting. If you don't want it to be a mundane person that they're helping out, the same thing applies if you're dealing with like a changeling or a vampire or another supernatural creature that needs your help. You still aren't gonna, you're still focusing on that micro of the story and the beats and how do we address this, and that's where you learn what the characters believe, and that helps you cement their paradigms in place, and then that lets you build towards bigger stories. So that's my recommendation.
No, perfect. Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Right, like ease yourself into it.
Yeah.
Don't. There's a lot to digest in this game, and you don't have to dive right into the deep end. You can wade in there.
Check out the jump starts, things like that. To my mind, a really good mage adventure plan. And honestly, the more I write adventures for any system, the more I think, you want to build out 5 to 10 scenes, look at your 5-act structure, and make sure that your scenes all somewhere fit on that 5-act structure, and keep it loose. Be like, this is the beat that needs to happen. Whatever gets you to that beat or whatever happens around that beat, why plan for it? The players are just going to run over your plans. So just make sure you know what those beats are, so you can sort of nudge things back in the direction of the beats. I'll give you a real quick example. I was running A Blessing and a Curse, which is sort of built for like pulling in characters that don't necessarily want to be involved with that story. And at every turn going into it, getting that story off the ground, the players were like, no way, we don't want anything to do with it. And just doing everything they could. I really had to sort of like push them, nudge them in those directions. Right. It was a lot of fun. I had a good time with it. Nice. But is there any supplement for planning mage adventures, like a how to do it? I would pick up Mage Made Easy by Seder on Storyteller's Vault. I don't know how much of that specifically deals with like planning for adventures, because it really boils down Mage to its core concepts and then represents it kind of away from the baggage of traditions and the baggage of metaplot and baggage of 25 years of backstory, and it just presents it as like these are the elements that make a good mage character and a good mage story. So I think Mage Made Easy would be the book you would want to pick up for sure.
Awesome. Any other questions out there? I mean, there will always be.
Oh yeah, anything. If you see Terry Robinson's name on anything, pick it up, including Lore of the Traditions, in which he wrote 2 chapters.
Celestial Chorus and Virtual Edit.
Yep. So he got to open up the Kickstarter and close it down with his. Well, he was the second tradition that we featured in the Kickstarter. And I'm going to go ahead and throw that link in the chat one more time.
Yeah.
Do we have a favorite tradition or traditions, and how about conventions? My favorite tradition? That's really hard to say. I've played Celestial Chorus the most. Or not Celestial Chorus, I'm sorry. Cult of Ecstasy the most.
Mm-hmm.
I've played Celestial Chorus the least. I vacillate a lot between which tradition I like the most, though. I would probably say the cult. The cult when it's done right. One of the things that was kind of a mission statement for Seder when we were working on lore, and that I 100% supported, was sort of showing that the Cult of Ecstasy is about much more than the sex, drugs, and rock and roll image that they have.
Mm-hmm.
But yet there are still also cultists who are just about that, and there's sort of a schism between those two philosophies.
Very nice.
And I'm very much into like the responsibility of knowing the future and how do you interact with that, and like that part is very compelling to me for the cult. As far as conventions, NWO 100%. I am a black suit till the day I die. I absolutely love the NWO. So those are my softball answers.
Convention, I'm not sure. I honestly, butt heads with a large number of concepts coming out of them, but probably the Void Engineers, because who doesn't like space or alternate dimensions and stuff like that?
Yeah.
In terms of traditions, well, Order of Hermes. I like the classic hermetic occult style of things, and while every tradition is very diverse and internally, I do like the sort of patchwork diversity of the order of, we'll bring you in and make you a house. What's your idea on this? Sure, we can incorporate that in. Let's bring you in and make you a house. And I like the kind of classic Western fantasy style of it, but updated.
The Order of Hermes is, they are really the oldest organization in the world of darkness in terms of like the real world, because they started in Ars Magica, which predates the world of darkness. They were always kind of the groundwork. And there's a lot of good things about the order, and there's a lot of things about the order that are a bit cringe, and there's a lot of things about the order that are sometimes, but that's all the traditions, and that's another one of the things that we try to face like head on in lore, is really look at like the sex, drugs, and rock and roll perception of the cult, the idea of some of the things that the Order of Hermes has canonically done that don't look good through the lens of history and didn't look good at the time to people. Looking at some of the interior struggles within this group of people that got lumped together to become the Dream Speakers, effectively by the Order of Hermes, and how those internal struggles have caused a grand challenge in coalescing into a effective tradition. We want to examine the shortcomings of all of them, because that's where all the fun is. That's the fun is for the characters to go in and right those wrongs and do it better, right? Like that's the fun part.
Like I said, I butt heads with a lot of the convention philosophies, and then I go ahead and say the Order of Hermes is my favorite tradition, but
Yeah.
but in the sense that, I like it, I like the trappings, but the philosophy of it, sometimes leaves something to be desired. So I'll butt heads with that too. But
Yeah,
like
but
I
that's
said in the
but the,
beginning, it's a punk rock thing. Get
well,
the
and the fun thing about that though is playing a hermetic who is like, oh, I'm about all this formula, but I'm going to change this order
mhm,
if I have to found my own house to do it.
right.
And there are canonical examples of mages doing that very
Mhm.
thing, you know?
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
do want to actually give a little shout out to the Celestial Chorus,
Yeah.
who I actually haven't read the preview of them yet. I mean to. I just haven't gotten to it yet, so I don't know what's come up there. But when I first came into Mage, had that general sort of cynicism towards anything and everything monotheistic, but over time, and through a couple of other Mage books, I always felt that the Celestial Chorus kind of got lumped in there a bit unfairly in the end, when really people were describing elements of the Order of Reason as being the sort of authoritarian ones, because the Celestial Chorus, who, for those of you who don't know who are watching, are a monotheistic sort of unity tradition, and they were a heresy back then.
Right.
And I found it took, I don't even know if it was until revised where I really properly noticed that, or even in Sorcerer's Crusade where it's explicit.
Right.
But that they're a heresy, they are not the norm of things. And the art for the tradition character in the core book is like a punk rocker. She's got a guitar, blue mohawk, I think.
Yeah.
Tattoos. Like, this is not this is not your prosperity gospel
Yeah.
belief system.
Very,
It's there's a lot to it, and it's very. It's not what you
yeah,
would expect if you're going to look at it from a cynic's.
very different. And one of the things that I do just want to shout this out before we
Mhm.
wrap it up, but one of the things that I was really impressed with that was 100% Terry's doing. Um, my development style in Lord of the Traditions was to hire well and then stay out of people's way the best I could.
Mhm.
Um, and Terry had some very interesting ideas about sort of a reformation that's happening within the chorus, where they're very much kind of embracing the idea that how you get to the one doesn't necessarily matter so much as that you get to the one,
Okay.
right? So a lot of the more militant factions, some sort of top-down decrees got made by the Celestial Chorus about who gets to be here, and some of the more militant factions of the chorus took off, like quit, like we're not going to share a table with those people, and the rest of the Celestial Chorus was like, that's fine if you choose to leave. There's the door, but we are accepting, this and this is these are the rules for being here, and sort of stating that very clearly. And part of that is the inclusion of um, really going back to that core concept that the one is pure unity, the pure manifestation of reality as a singular being, but but all of the faces it shows are valid,
Mhm.
you know. And I thought that was a really cool way that was tackled. That he also found a way to give the Celestial Chorus an like a version of requisitions like the Technocracy has, which I think is great. Like, no, listen, we need like a 14th century Crusaders sword. Oh, okay, I think we've got one. Let me dig one up. It's pretty cool that Celestial Choristers can do that, because it makes sense. It's kind of like a church relic borrowing program.
Mhm.
So I thought that was a really neat innovation. I'm really happy
We
with
need
that.
this piece of the True Cross here by morning.
Right, exactly. So
Awesome
yeah,
stuff. What I have read of the previews is fantastic. So I am
I'm
going to
glad you're
plug
liking it.
Lord of the Traditions here. Definitely go check it out.
Thank you.
And it's going to be a great addition as well to further flesh out the M20 line. I was really hoping it would come along when I saw the Technocracy one pop up. But
I feel incredibly fortunate to be able to be involved with it at all.
It's really cool stuff.
It's very much a dream come true for me.
Awesome. Okay, so I guess we'll wrap up there. We've gone a little overtime, but
That's all right.
It was a blast. So who cares?
I won't tell the Twitch programming coordinator if you don't.
Oh, good. Okay, yeah. Mum's a word.
For those of you who are unaware, I'm the Twitch programming coordinator. So yeah, no, I really appreciate you doing this and being here, and don't worry about any tech issues. Those always happen the first, 10, 12 streams, 20 streams. I just had one on Tuesday, so don't feel bad.
This will be like down cold. So, stick around to the end to see no technical issues. That's your reward. So, also thank you everyone in the chat for showing up and participating. Those of you who suggested spells, we will look at them in a little more detail when we come to how do you do that. But we will be, I will be trying to draw from the M20 line here. So while the core book is sort of the guide, we will be pulling in the other books to flesh out the various topics we're discussing. So 2 weeks from now, we'll talk about time depending, we'll talk about as many of the factions as we can and the World of Darkness as a setting for Mage the Ascension. Also, if you're just in it for the lore and all that sort of thing, we're not even going to get to rules for a little while yet. So you've got some time. Thank you, Travis, for being here. Thank you for the opportunity. It was awesome. Really enjoyed it.
I had a great time, and I really appreciate being here, and I really appreciate the chat and the questions and your support. And thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. Well, so again, thank you, everybody. Have a good night, because even if you're on Pacific time, it's past 7 p.m., so it counts as night. And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
This is the long wave video on the channel while we wait for the vaccine screen.
Awesome.
I think we still have audio going out the